Okay, today's topic is... What is today's topic? Grandparents. Grandparents. Very important topic. And what do we have to say about it? What does Judaism say about grandparents? What is the purpose? What is the function? What do we do as grandparents? And I think we mentioned before that being a grandparent has got tremendous advantages over being a parent. Not least of all being that you can just hand the kid back to its parents and say, here, that's it. You can enjoy the best times and you can leave when times get rough. So that's the advantage of being a grandparent. But it also has tremendous advantages in terms of the moral factor, in terms of the educational factor. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. And it's interesting because most people don't know there's a mitzvah in the Torah which deals specifically with grandparents. The Torah tells us in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, it says, V'odatem et bincha ve'et ben bincha. You will teach your children and your grandchildren. And the mitzvah over there is dealing with faith in God. It seems like there's a special effect that the grandparents have more than the parents have. So there's a mitzvah on the parent teaches children. There's a mitzvah also on the grandparents to teach their children. Rambam, Maimonides, brings this down, the laws of Talmud Torah. There's a whole section over here in Rambam called Hilchot Talmud Torah, the laws of learning Torah. And he says, I'm just quoting the Rambam, just as there is an obligation of a person to teach his children, so also there's an obligation of a person to teach their grandchildren. And then he quotes this verse in Deuteronomy, V'odatem levanecha levnei vanecha. You will teach your children and you will teach your grandchildren. And it's not only a mitzvah to teach your children and your grandchildren, it's a mitzvah on every wise person in Israel to teach as many students as possible. So this is a very broad mitzvah. It applies to us as parents, applies to us as grandparents, and it also applies to us in general as in terms of having as many students as possible. Now a person might say, you know what, I don't know very much. How can I teach? And the answer is there's a mitzvah to teach whatever you know. So a person knows Aleph Bet. How many Jews there are in this country who don't even know how to read Aleph Bet? I was having a discussion at a rabbinical conference of the values of secular education for rabbis. I'm very much in favor of it. I think it's very important. There was one rabbi there who argued, he says, listen, I deal with professors and PhDs, but you know what? I have one advantage over them. I know how to read, they don't. So in other words, what's the value of being a PhD in Judaism when you're dealing with people who don't even know Aleph Bet? So anyone over here can probably teach hundreds of thousands of Jews today in America. So there's a mitzvah of teaching the children, grandchildren, and there's also a mitzvah of teaching in general. We all have to try and fulfill this mitzvah. If you see someone who knows less than you, try and educate them. Try and teach them a bit of what you learnt. That's a very, very important technique in terms of remembering what one learnt. How does a person remember what they learnt? And the answer is, if you can give it over to someone else, that's a sign that you remember it. And Rabbi Akiva said, I learnt more from my students than from anyone else. Because the students used to ask him questions, and this way he clarified things in his own mind. So it's a very important idea. But there's a mitzvah to teach your children, to teach your grandchildren. And there's also a mitzvah to teach other Jews as well. And a person has a mitzvah to first teach their children. There's priorities in this mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to teach all Jews. But there's a priority in the mitzvah. Parents have an obligation to teach their children first, and teach their grandchildren, and then, like any other mitzvah, it's interesting, family comes first. The home always comes first. We talked about in laws of charity. Charity begins at home. If you have a poor person who's a relative, come before other poor people. If you have a poor person in your own town, come before other poor people. If you have a poor person in your own community, they come before other poor people. So the same thing applies to learning Torah. A person's got to teach their own environments first. It comes first, the priority comes first. Sometimes it's harder to teach your own children than to teach other children. And a person's got to use their own judgment. I want to teach my children, but you know what? It's so hard being a parent to be on top of them all the time. They get fed up. They like seeing fresh faces. Sometimes they respect others more than they respect you, and that's where grandparents come in. Grandparents don't get on children's nerves as much as the parents do. because the parents are always commanding and giving advice and telling them what to do. Grandparents give a fresh approach. The grandparents the children know love them. That's number one. Grandparents generally don't discipline them. So that's great. So there's an affinity to grandparents where there's not so much affinity to parents. Parents are always disciplining, shouting, screaming, you get on my nerves and this and that, eat your dinner, do this, run here, do this errand and do that errand. Grandparents come in, treats, presents, smiles, hopefully. Good nature. Why? Because they know it's only a few days, let's enjoy. Grandparents want to enjoy their grandchildren. Parents today, unfortunately, they don't know what it's like to enjoy their children. You have to enjoy. It's a tremendous thing to enjoy one's children. Once you approach it as a burden, children feel that they're a burden on their parents. You've got to treat children as if it's a pleasure to deal with them. It's a real pleasure. A person's got to treat it like a pleasure. And that's the advantage that grandparents have. Because for grandparents, it's a true pleasure. It's not a burden. It's a pleasure. It's something that grandparents look forward to because they know I have a limited amount with my grandchild. I'm going to leave them and they're going to leave me, whatever it is. And therefore, it's a pleasure. So the person looks to pleasure. And the children feel also, my grandparents enjoy me. They feel it's a pleasure. So there's a total different relationship between children and the parents and children and grandparents. A totally new, different relationship. And the grandparents should take advantage of the relationship. For what? To guide in a very subtle way. Because grandparents can guide as friends more than the parents can. Because parents are just authoritative figures. Grandparents are not authoritative figures. They're not figures which scare the children. They're more friendly figures who the children respect because of their age and maturity. So it's something which a person who's a wise grandparent will know how to use to the best of their advantage. We'll see the weaknesses in the relationship between the parents and the children, and we'll try and make up for those weaknesses. We'll try and guide without being heavy-handed, without shouting and screaming. Just try and guide in a nice way. It'll have effects on the grandchildren. So grandparents are these kindly, loving, gift-bearing, aging persons. In the life of grandchildren, have a lot more to offer than just cookies, hugs, and kisses. Normally that's the people come in, what do they offer? Hugs, kisses, cookies, and presents. And so unfortunately, a lot of people didn't see their grandparents. I, for one, didn't have much contact. I think I saw my grandfather when I was 4 years old, that's it. My grandmother, one grandmother out of 4. So it's something which, unfortunately today, we're living in a world where we're distant from everyone, the family. People are scattered all over the world. So people don't see their grandparents as much as they should. And the grandparents have responsibilities as well. And the grandparents' responsibilities are also to teach their grandchildren. And so they have to teach their grandchildren. What does it say? Teach the grandchildren about the day that you stood before your God at Sinai. You have to teach them about Matan Torah. The grandparents have an obligation to teach the children, I'm part of the Masorah. I'm part of the traditions. And you know what? I'm your grandparent. I believe in those traditions. In other words, the children can't come along and say, you know what? I never had a tradition. Because the parents may say something, but when they hear it from the grandparents, they believe it more. Because the grandparents go back even further. So the grandparents can share their traditions. The children see the grandparents and say, wow, I have a tradition. My grandfather had an impact on me, even though I never saw him in real life. I just have a picture of him. I carry a picture of him in my pocket. And I had a picture of him on my wall, the other grandfather on my wall, when I was a kid. He was my hero. I never even knew him, but he was my hero. Why? I saw something we all need grandparents. We need something to say, you know what, we're linked to previous generations. We have a link. The grandparents are the links to previous generations, more than the parents are. Because parents we take for granted. Grandparents are special. Everyone feels that grandparents are special. So grandparents are the link. And they have to teach, as the Torah tells them, to teach in the giver of God. God is the giver of the Torah. They have to teach that we're part of this tradition, this great tradition. And grandparents can tell children stories about what they saw in real life images, what we saw and how Jews were in those days and what we used to do. And it's a very, very important part of it is just the stories. He talks about how stories educate more than anything else. Tell a child a story and they remember the stories. So that's the function of grandparents. Wise grandparents will tell kids good stories, what it was like in those days, and the stories should have a moral impact on the kid. It was like we could leave our doors open, just saying something like that. In my days, we could leave our doors open. There was no robbery, everyone respected each other, things were on a different level, so the children will remember that, It was a different level at that time. So that's a very important idea. And we find also there's another verse in the Torah, which also in Deuteronomy. The Torah tells us, Sha'al avicha v'yagercha. Ask your father and he will tell you. Zekenecha, your elders, referring to your grandparents, v'yomru lach, and they will tell you as well. So the parents will tell you, it uses a different word. It says v'yagercha. Lehagid is a stronger language. You ask your parents something, and they'll tell you in a strong language. You ask your grandparents v'yomru, and they will say to you. They won't tell you, they'll say to you. It's a different approach. You see, the Torah is using different words. Where the Torah uses different words, has a very, very lot of meaning to it. And the meaning over here is, again, as we said, the different relationship. So parents are tough and harsh and commanding. Grandparents will just tell you. They'll speak to you nicely. There's a very famous rabbi in the time of the Talmud. His name is Yonatan ben Uziel. The Talmud says when he learned Torah, there would be like a fiery pillar above his head, a very big Kabbalist. And he also translated the whole Torah into Aramaic. It's called Targum Yonatan ben Uziel. If you look at the Chumash in Hebrew, you'll find on the side, there's a Targum, there's a commentary in Aramaic of Yonatan ben Uziel. So he says, ask your father, he says, these are the books of the Torah. Who's our father? So that we have physical parents. And our other father is the Torah. These are the books of the Torah. 5 books of Moses. Our father literally is Moses. Moses is our father. What do you mean? Because we drink from his waters. So he's our father. And who's our elders? He says, not our grandparents, but our prophets. Our prophets who came after Moshe. Moshe wrote the 5 books of Moses. The prophets, the Nevi'im, wrote the rest of the books. So you can interpret, ask your father, he says, that's Moses. Ask your elders, those are the prophets. What does that mean? What's going on? So what is he doing? He's identifying the father, our parents, with Moshe Rabbeinu, with the Torah. And he's identifying the grandparents with the prophets. Interesting. We can learn a lot by this. What is he trying to tell us? The father is the Torah. The grandfather is the Navi, is the prophet. So what does that mean? It means that when the father, the parents, speak to the child, it's equated that the child's eyes as Torah. The Torah says you have to honor your parents. You have to listen to what they say. Because the Torah is giving them certain rights and privileges, just like Torah itself, just like God. Just like we have to listen to what God says, we have to listen to what our parents say. So the Torah is equating parents with God. The parents are the Torah. So parents must realize this lofty position that the Torah expects them to maintain in the eyes of their children. And that's why honor given to the parents is equated to honor given to God. So parents got to realize, in my child's eyes, and truth is when they're younger, it's more true. The older they grow, the less it's true. In the child's eyes, when they're young, my father and mother are like God. When the child grows up, it depends on what the parents behave. The parents behave in that way, and they earn the respect. Because the parents got to earn the respect of the children. So if they earn the respect of their children, you'll find the children all respect them. Always. All through their lives, they're going to respect them. And that's the kind of education we're meant to give to our children, to always try and respect their parents, and we have to earn their respect. And that's very hard. However, grandparents have a different kind of relationship. And grandparents must treat their children as mature adults. The grandchildren are going to be treated like mature adults. So parents got different relationships with their children, and grandparents and grandchildren got different relationship. The grandparents must treat their children as mature adults, even if they're very young. So if grandparents also, sometimes they can see immature behavior by parents. That's very important for a grandparent not to contradict the parents in front of the children, because then the child has an excuse. Grandpa says, my father's a lousy father. So my father's a lousy father, must be right. I agree. Or grandma says, my mother doesn't know how to deal with her kids. She doesn't know how to cook, she doesn't know how to do this. It's terrible. It's cutting down the relationship. It's breaking the relationship instead of making the relationship. So children have to see their parents as absolute authority, And the grandparents must never undermine that position. The grandparents have to know never to undermine their own children. Even when the grandparents are alone with the parents, it's my own children. I want to tell them how to raise their family. Don't give advice unless it's asked for. Grandparents should not give advice unless it's asked for. If they want to be appreciated and they want to be welcome even more, especially today, you have the in-law thing, the person's going to be very careful. Bite one's tongue. Grandparents should bite their tongues. Why? Because by saying something, they can undermine the parents in front of their children. Even if there are no children around, they can undermine the parents' esteem of themselves as parents. I'm wrong. I'm a bad parent. I don't know anything about parenting. So the grandparents got to be very careful when they offer advice. And one of the famous rabbis, Rabbi Schwab, he's a rabbi in Washington Heights of the Yeki community, Breuer community. Very, very famous rabbi. He said this to his children. He says, the more one offers, the less the parents are going to ask. The less one offers, he says, you wait, they're going to come knocking on your door for advice. So grandparents should try their best not to offer advice. Just smile. And then you'll see that the parents are going to come and ask them for advice. How am I going to do this? How do I handle this situation? How do I handle that situation? But that's normally true in any way. The more you offer advice, the more you try and give orders, the less people want to ask questions. They feel like you want to take over. So it's interesting because the grandparents who live far away, they get more phone calls than if they live close together, close by. Because unless they see them, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So the grandparents' role is really to keep away, stay aloof, and see if they're needed. If they're needed, instead of forcing themselves and pushing themselves on the family, try and stay away and be asked questions. When the grandparents are visiting the home, the grandchildren are going to observe. Number one, they're going to observe is how do my parents relate to my grandparents? Do they give them honor? Do they give them respect? If they give them honor and respect, then it's more likely that they're going to get respect from their own children. Look how my father honors his father. Look how my mother honors her mother, her parents. I'm going to do the same for them. But if they see that the parents don't honor and respect their own parents, well, my father's a lousy son, I'm going to be a lousy son. My mother's a lousy daughter, I'm going to be a lousy daughter. So that's also very important. That's fundamental also, how the grandparents are treated. You know, the famous story of one of the Russian writers. Kid was living in a house where the grandparents were abused. The parents didn't look after the grandparents, old grandparents. So one day the son was making a wooden bowl. He was making a wooden bowl, a hobby. He was carving out a wooden bowl. So it was a very rich household. They didn't have wooden bowls in their household. They had china. So the father passes by and he sees his son. He said, "Oh, you're making something for your grandpa." He said, "No, Dad." He said, "I'm making it for you when you get older." But that's the way. It's very important to teach the parents how they treat their parents. That's the way their children are going to come back and treat them. And unfortunately today, a lot of parents don't treat their parents. We talk about the in-between generation. It's called the in-between generation. That we have to deal with our parents, we have to deal with our children. And we're torn in two places. They have older parents, younger children. The middle generation is torn in two places. But we have to give a good example to our own children. So we really have to give the example to our children how to respect our parents. So normally, the grandparents should be treated very well. They visit the house. The parents got to give them honor and respect. And they should give them honor and respect. However, if they come for a long term, the children should always see that their parents are the head of the households. So in other words, if they come for short term, the parents can say, "You know what, take over for a few days. Dad, you make the kiddush. Mom, you take over." 3-4 days. More than that, no. It's not good for the children to see their grandparents take over. They lose their respect for their parents. The grandparents should say, "You know what, no, we're going to be here for a while. You're the parents, you handle the house. We're not going to take over your role. We're not going to usurp your role." When the children serve the table, they should serve their own parents first, not the grandparents. It's interesting. Honoring parents comes before honoring grandparents. Interesting. Very interesting Jewish law. So in other words, we have to honor our grandparents through our parents. The only reason why we have to honor grandparents is because we have to honor our parents. So part of honoring our parents is to honor their parents. Part of honoring our parents, say the parent gets married again. Different spouse. Today is very common. It says a mitzvah to honor one's parent's spouse Why? That's the honor of one's parents. So it's not, my father married again. My stepmother now. Do I have to honor my stepmother? She's not my mother. And the answer is I have to honor my father. If that's his wife, I have to honor her because of him, through him. So the same thing applies to grandparents. I have to honor my grandparents because they're the parents of my parents. So the mitzvah goes through the parents. Interesting. So that's the grandparents have got to use their brains. If the whole mitzvah of honoring them comes through the parents, they better not usurp the role of the parents. They've got to show respect to the parents as well. It's a very important idea. Yes?
What happens like these days that in some families the grandparents are taking care of the children instead of the parents because the parents are drug abusing and stuff like that, and they have honor to the grandparents more than to the parents?
Yes, I agree.
Things are going vice versa.
I agree. In a case like that, they would have to show more honor to the grandparents. There's another issue over here which I didn't mention, which is the idea of Darkei Shalom. Important idea. Let me give you an example. Foster parents. Is there a mitzvah to honor your foster parents? There's so many people today have foster children. Unbelievable. And they're always looking for more foster parents. And the answer is there's no direct mitzvah. They're not your parents. The mitzvah of honoring parents applies to biological parents. But there's a mitzvah of Shalom Bayit. What Shalom Bayit? Keeping peace in the house. As we tell the child, you have to honor them. So when is it written in the Torah? And the answer is it's a rabbinical mitzvah of Shalom Bayit. There's a mitzvah to have peace in the house. The ways of the Torah are the ways of pleasantness and all its ways of peace. All its pathways of peace. There's a mitzvah of Shalom. A person's got to be very careful. It's a big problem today. Because people open their mouths and they make trouble. And we know what's going on in the bigger world, in the broader world. It's very unfortunate. And the rabbis are going to be the first ones to do this. We're going to set the example of making peace. And it's very unfortunate what's going on. But we have to give the example. And in situations like that, we tell the foster child there is a mitzvah. The mitzvah is a mitzvah of peace. Respect them and honor them if you want peace in the house. And it's part of your advantage to have peace in the house. Otherwise they're going to throw you out. So there's a mitzvah of that. So it's not just through the mitzvah of honoring parents. There's also mitzvah of Shalom Bayit. So now let's go back to your example where the grandparents are looking after the children. The parents are useless. The parents are drug addicts. So there's a mitzvah now directly to honor the grandparents, not only because of the mitzvah of honoring them, but also the mitzvah of Shalom Bayit. They're providers for you. There's a mitzvah also of Hakarat HaTov, which is recognizing goodness in someone. Where do we see that in the Torah? It's interesting mitzvah. The Torah says, Lo tochlu kol nevela. Don't eat any nevela. What's nevela? There's 3 kinds of non-kosher meat. This week's parasha coming up, Shmini. 3 kinds of non-kosher meat. One kind of non-kosher meat is a non-kosher species of animal. It's animals which don't chew the cud, which don't have cloven hooves are non-kosher. Horse, camels, pigs, all these animals are non-kosher. Most people just think of pig. It's not true. Many animals, only the animals, which species are kosher? Cow, buffalo, bison, deer, and sheep, and goats. There's very few species which are kosher animals. The other kinds of animals are called tameh. They're called behemat tameh. Animals which are tameh. The second kind of non-kosher meat is kosher animal, but it wasn't killed through shechita, nevila. Well, today most of the stores sell cow's meat. Most of the meat comes from cows. So cow's meat is kosher. It's a kosher variety, but it wasn't killed properly. That's called nevila. And then the third kind, which is a kosher animal, which kosher shechita. What happened? It's an animal which has a blemish inside, an internal wound, which the rabbis figured out. The Torah gave laws saying it's going to die within a year. It's sick. A sick animal, it's worse than USDA. It's worse than the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These standards are much higher. For example, glut kosher. What's glut kosher? They examine the lungs of the animal to see if they have any blemishes. Glut means it's smooth. If the lungs are smooth, it's a sign the animal is healthy internally. So that is called a treifa. Treif. Today we use treif to designate any non-kosher meat. Really, treif means it's kosher variety, it's killed through shechita, but it had a wound inside, blemish. That's treif. So there's 3 different things which are non-kosher. So the Talmud says, in those days you found a nevela. What's a nevela? It's a kosher variety of animal which died not through shechita. It was killed by a wild animal in those days. It died of old age. Nevela. You're not allowed to eat it. What does the Torah tell us to do with it? Throw it to a dog. throw it to a dog. Why dogs? Give it to something else. Do something else with it. So there's a couple of opinions. One opinion is because the Torah says that when the Jews left Egypt, lo yecharash kelev neshano, dogs never barked. The dogs were quiet. So we reward the dogs. Hakarat hatov, we remember the dogs. We want to do something good to the dogs. The dogs were good to us when we left. Normally every slave that was running away, the dogs were barking, catch him, barking and biting. And the Jews left Egypt, the dogs stopped barking. So the Torah says, reward the dogs. Hakarat hatov. The Tosfot Zekanim goes one step further. It says a brilliant idea. It says, which dog are we talking about? We're talking about the sheepdog. In those days, they had sheepdogs. They were shepherds. Read the Bible. Most of our leaders were all shepherds. Shepherds were, a lot of Jews were shepherds in those days. So we're talking about the sheepdog who made a mistake. What happened was, wild animals attacked the pack. The sheepdog, instead of protecting them, ran away or made a mistake and let the wolf in. The wolf comes and kills the sheep. The Torah is telling us, reward the dog. Give that sheep. But that dog made a mistake. It's the dog's fault. The sheep got killed. The Torah says, you know what? Forgive the dog and give the sheep to the dog. It's a dead sheep. I'm going to reward the dog for its failure? The Torah says yes. Why? So Tosfos Zekanim says, remember all the times the dog was useful. Remember all the times the dog was successful. Reward the dog now to remember all the times the dog served you faithfully. That's an important idea for us. It's called Hakarat Hatov, which is remembering kindnesses done by other people. And that's a very important mitzvah as well. Foster parents, or in your case of the grandparents looking after the child, number one, has to honor them because they're his grandparents, through the parents. He has to honor his parents, he has to honor his grandparents. Number two, he has to honor them because of Darkei Shalom, because they're looking after him and he wants peace in the house. And number three, he has to honor them because of Hakarat Hatov. And this also applies to parents as well. Whereas the mitzvah to honor parents, that's one mitzvah. There's other things as well, the Shalom Bayit. For example, the Talmud says, a lost object. Person finds $5 on the street. So in Jewish law, there's no sign on it. You can keep it. There's no siman. There's no names listed. There's no wallet. There's no signs. There's no symbols. You don't know whose it is. There's no way of finding out whose it is. You can keep it. The child finds it. Who keeps it? So Talmud says, interesting law. It says the parent gets it. Why? Shalom Bayit. You don't want the parent and the child arguing whose it is. The child comes along and says, it's mine. I found it. I keep it. The parent will say, you ingrate. I keep you in my house and I support you and you keep everything. So the Talmud says it belongs to the parents. If the parents want to give it to the child, the parents give it to the child. It belongs to the parents. Now it's interesting, the Talmud also discusses till what age is a person a child? Till what age does this law apply? Guess what? The Talmud says an interesting idea. It says, Katan, she'eno somech al shulchan aviv, gadol hu. A child who doesn't rely on his parents for sustenance is considered an adult. Gadol, she'somech al shulchan aviv, nikra katan. The grown-up who's still relying on his parents is a child for this law. What does that mean? He needs shalom bayit. Person's still dependent, he needs shalom bayit. He needs peace in the house, or he's going to be thrown out. So Rabbi said, you know what, you want shalom bayit? Give them the lost object. Because they're supporting you. You have to mark out it off. If you're independent, keep it. If you're dependent, so we see this idea of shalom bayit is very, very important. The idea of darkei shalom is very important. The idea of hakarat hatov, of returning favors and remembering people's goodness to someone is also very important. So a person's got to honor their parents, primary, and it's also got to honor their grandparents through their parents. That's very important. Now why does Targum Yonatan, we didn't discuss, why does it compare grandparents to Navi? So we said parents are compared to Torah. Why? Because parents are on the same status in the child's eyes as God when the child is small. So parents are compared to the Torah. Why does the Yonatan ben Uziel say that the elders, the grandparents, are compared to the prophets? So you find, what are the roles of the prophets? One of the roles of the prophets is to convey God's word to the people. The prophet is a medium, not like us. We can communicate with God through our prayers, but God doesn't communicate to us directly. Prophets got direct communication from God, and they were the vehicles to pass this message on. It's interesting, not all prophets were vehicles. Some prophets got messages just for themselves. God speaks to them for their own goodness. Sometimes it's only for their own family. For example, Samson's mother saw an angel. She had prophecy. What kind of prophecy? A personal prophecy. You're going to have a child. It wasn't a prophecy she had to repeat to the whole people. So we see this even private prophecies. But normally a regular prophet was a prophet who had a prophecy, and he was the medium to spread the word. What's interesting is also the prophet had his own, every prophet has their own style of expression. Whereas I get a message, I have to pass it on. How do I pass it on? In my own way. I mean, God gives me a message. How do I pass it on? I pass it on in my own language. I pass it on using my own education, my own abilities of speech. So not every prophet spoke the same way, depending on the prophet. Moshe Rabbeinu had a terrible stutter. He was a prophet with a stutter. He had a big problem. He had to pass his message on. That's why he says, you want to pass the message on, you chose the wrong guy. He's arguing 7 days with God. You chose the wrong guy. God says, don't worry, I can fix your stutter for you. I'm also a doctor. I can fix your stutter for you. I can fix everything. So it's interesting. Every prophet. Sometimes there weren't people around to be prophets. This was the only guy for the job. So it's hard for God to find a prophet. It had a person who's a very holy person, very spiritual person. It's very hard to find. So what do we see over there? Yonatan ben Uzziah is comparing grandparents to prophets. We see over there it's a personal thing. Every grandparent has their own style. Every grandparent has a message which they convey in their own unique style. So they have to explain who they are, what their life experiences have been, what they have seen, their accomplishments, and their spiritual nature, and that's how they pass it down to their grandchildren. They have to pass down their unique message to the grandchildren. And we say in the Haftarah blessing, the Haftarah, every Shabbat, we read the Torah portion, we read the Haftarah. The Haftarah is always from the prophets. We say the bracha, it's interesting bracha. Asher bachar benevim tovim. God chose good prophets. And God wanted their words, which were said in truth. So now, grandparents are compared to prophets. God chose good prophets. You have to realize, the grandparents have to realize, God chose us to be prophets. And God wants good prophets. And God is pleased with words that are uttered with truth. So the good prophets are the grandparents, whose goodness should go beyond endearing gifts and just embraces. The good prophets should be, they communicate the truth. God is pleased with the words that were uttered with truth. So prophets have got to pass down words of truth. Grandparents are getting closer to the future world, and they have to be more recognizant of temporary nature of life. And that's really a message they have to pass down to the grandchildren. Look at me. I'm 80 years old, I'm 90 years old, whatever I am now, I'm getting in my old age. This is what life is all about. Sometimes I regret the vanities of my youth. You know, what you're doing right now, you're running around and around. I also did the same thing. But look, where did it get me? Did it improve me? Did it add things to me? The person's also got to say, look, this is what we lived for. This was our main purpose in life. The person has more time to think. What is our main purpose in life? What are we living for? So these are things which a person has to share with their grandchildren. So now it's fundamental emunah, belief. This is what we believe in. This is very, very important.